Hello and welcome to this series on AWS networking, and today we are discussing VPC Wizard. Now, we know that VPC is one of the fundamental building block or the component under AWS networking, but it doesn't work in isolation. It requires other networking component to be associated with it, like a subnet, like network access control list, like internet gateway, NAT gateway, depending upon what kind of architecture you are trying to achieve. But there is a step-by-step approach, and quite a few steps are required before we could actually deploy a basic architecture or a basic VPC layout. So what we want to discuss today is the option called VPC and more, which is equivalent to a wizard approach of creating VPC and associated component. So in last video, what we achieved was via the VPC only approach, wherein this form only gives you option to create the VPC on the first step. Then you have to go back to your VPC section and then go about creating each of these components individually. So if you want to create subnet, you go via the create subnet option, then create subnet and associate it with that particular VPC under which you want to create. Then again, if you have other components, like for example, if you want internet gateway, so all of these steps you have to perform one by one before you could achieve the basic architecture that you are trying to achieve. So you understand now that this can be a lengthy process if we take the VPC only approach. So that's where the VPC and more, or the wizard approach, helps you eliminate this lengthy process of achieving your basic networking architecture or networking layout. You can eliminate the many configuration options that you have to go through when you are creating the VPC via the VPC only approach. You can go and take the VPC and more option, and what it does is that it also gives you a visualization of what you are trying to create. So when you are taking the VPC and more approach, this is the default layout that has been defined in the wizard. So you are able to see this association. So you have the VPC, then you have the association to the subnets that are associated with the VPC, the private subnet and public subnet under each availability zone, as you can see here. And then you can also see the association of each subnet to the route tables that are located here. So there are public route tables and then custom private route tables individually for each availability zones that are defined here. And then you have the VPC S3 endpoints, and then you have the internet gateway association also visible to you here. So all this configuration options, even before you deploy this configuration or this architecture or this VPC layout, you could actually visualize it when you are trying to configure it. So for example, suppose if I am saying that I want to have my subnets in 3 availability zones. So you could see that one more availability zone has been created here in addition to the 2. Now we have one public subnet and one private subnet under each availability zone. Now if you want to have, say, one more privates, that is one public and 2 private subnets, what we can do is that number of private subnets, we can say that we want 6. So here you can see that now we have like 2 private subnet under each availability zone. That means 2 into 3, 6. And as you can see here that we have all the associations also defined. So these route tables there is a main route table that is automatically created and automatically associated with each of these subnets. And the associations are also automatically established with the new route tables that are getting created. Now, if we are talking about the NAT gateways, we could define here to create a NAT gateway, whether we want one NAT gateway in one of the availability zone, or for higher availability, if we want one NAT gateway in each of the availability zones. So you could see here that when I clicked here, there are 3 NAT gateways that are created, and each belongs to each of the availability zone. Similarly, if I want to, I'll switch back to just one for now, and then if you want, you can have S3 gateway if your requirement is such that your resources needs to talk to S3 services, because remember S3 lies outside of the VPC scope, because S3 by default it is public in nature, so the S3 services do not fall in the VPC realm. So that's the reason why, if your resources required to reach to an S3 bucket, it would require an endpoint, and that also helps reduce the traffic via your NAT gateway, which will incur you cost. So that's where this comes in handy. But for this instance, let's remove this. Let's have public NAT gateway also removed. For now, let's keep this to defaults, and what I will name this as and with this you can see that when you add a tag, all the resources will be associated with this tag, so that it is easier to identify in the list of your VPCs or subnets. So all that we need to now do is that we need to just click on create VPC, and it will go about taking all these steps and defining all these steps automatically, which I earlier via the VPC only approach will have to go individually in each services and configure this. Now we can go about viewing our VPC, and this is already created and all the associations are available to us. If we go to our VPC list, we can see that this is the VPC. You could just that is created, and under this VPC we are able to visualize all the associations. So under subnets, we can see that we have all these subnets created, and if we click on a particular subnet, we could see that the route tables are already created, and we have the routes defined. Since this is a private subnet, so on the routes you don't see any route pointing to any internet gateway. But if I am taking any subnet that is public subnets, for example this one is a public subnet, so here if we go into the route table, we'll see that there is a route associated with the internet gateway. This internet gateway is also created, and you can see that this is TechHub IGW. So with this, we see that with the VPC and more approach, or the wizard approach, we are able to achieve the desired architecture in one go, as against a VPC only approach wherein we'll have to go through each of these steps individually before we could achieve the desired architecture. So this helps us eliminate greatly the time, effort, and complexity of creating your basic networking architecture with VPC, and before it could be ready for you to deploy your resources within the VPC. I hope you found this video useful, and please stay tuned for more interesting videos under this AWS networking series. Thanks for watching.